Thank you for joining us for the first public program of JSMA's fall term, a talk with artist Libby Wadsworth. I'm Danielle Knapp, Makash curator at the museum, and we know there are a lot of great art events happening in town this weekend, so we're so happy you're spending some of your time with us today. Libby's work is currently on view in the JSMA Artist Project space, and we've just expanded our public hours to Wednesdays through Sundays again, so you have lots of opportunities to see always information through November 7th. And during the talk today, I'll share information in the chat about how you can plan your visit. I want to begin by acknowledging that JSMA is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and continue to make important contributions to the communities, to the UO, to Oregon, and to the world. In following the Indigenous protocol of acknowledging the original people of the land we occupy, we also extend our respect to the 9 federally recognized Indigenous Nations of Oregon, the Burns Paiute Tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Coquille Indian Tribe, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. We also express our respect to the many more tribes who have ancestral connections to this territory, as well to all other displaced Indigenous peoples who call Oregon home. It's been a pleasure and at times an adventure collaborating with Libby Wadsworth on her exhibition over the last 2 years and navigating the challenges of planning an exhibition during a pandemic, through a museum closure and reopening. And so I first and foremost want to thank Libby for all of her flexibility and her efforts during the planning process, and as well as sharing her work with museum audiences and for her time today talking with us. I also want to thank Jill Hartz, former JSMA director, for initiating this project, and our current director, John Weber, for contributing a really fantastic interview with Libby that will appear in the forthcoming exhibition catalog about Always Information. And we expect the catalog to arrive at the museum a couple of weeks from now. So during Libby's talk, I'll drop a link in the chat where you can pre-order the book. So if you're interested, you can be sure to be one of the first people to receive a copy at your earliest chance. My thanks also to JSMA designer Mike Bragg for his beautiful work on that publication, and to Paul Nordquist, our colleague working behind the scenes to run our event with us today, and to all of my JSMA colleagues who helped Libby and me make this exhibition possible. Today, Libby will share images of her work for the next half hour or so, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. So you're welcome to add questions to the Q&A box during the talk. And depending on the questions and how many we're getting, Libby can either answer some during her presentation, or we'll save most of them for the end of the talk. And in case this is helpful, within the Zoom webinar features, you can choose to turn on closed captioning if you wish during our discussion. And then also please keep an eye on the chat box, although that's not open for audience chat. Since we're directing questions to the Q&A box, I will include some links while Libby's presenting. I'll drop links there to refer you to other resources on her work and other things that will help you plan your visit, we hope, to the JSMA to see these wonderful works in person. So I don't want to delay our guest of honor any longer, so I will hand over my Zoom mic to Libby Wadsworth. Thank you so much, Libby, for being here today to talk about your show.
Well, thank you, Danielle. This is great. I will now attempt to screen share. Okay, here we go. Well, thank you, Danielle, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday to join us for this conversation or walkthrough of my exhibition, Always Information. I had truly hoped we would all be in the gallery together to do this, but alas, it's not to be. However, I hope you all have time to visit the show in person and, of course, come to see all the other shows at the JSMA right now, and they're all incredible. So, with further ado, I will advance the slide. So This first slide is sort of an installation view of the 5 pieces that make up the title of the show, Always Information. And I'd like to begin by looking closely at these 5 pieces. By taking a closer look at these pieces, I hope I can share a view into my thought process and into my art making practice. First, the words of the title of the show and the words in these pieces can be read in 2 or maybe more ways. First, information, and then information. By separating in and formation, our reading of the word becomes quite different. In my work, I like to call attention to the possibility of multiple ways of reading, whether word or image or combination thereof. We tend to think of information as a static concept, but by adding the space in between in and formation, the meaning becomes something that's not fixed or static. Meaning is in formation, literally, or something coming into being. The word implies and enacts the process of cognition that a viewer goes through as they engage with the works. And likewise, it's a kind of record of my thoughts or trials in arranging the letters while making the work. The photographs in the background or behind the text are still lives of broken teacups arranged in different configurations. I think of these pieces of cups as somewhat like the letters of the letters, in that they are being reorganized and reconfigured in hopes of becoming something other than what they once were. And in a sense, they were once whole and then they were broken apart, and now they're being put back together in a new way. I also tend to work in series, and this is a series for sure. I like to create variations or different iterations of an idea using the same or similar elements. Here, it's different arrangements of letters that make up the word information or information, and different configurations of broken teacups in the photographs behind. So here's a close-up of 3 of these pieces. So you can get a sort of closer view and you can sort of see the teacups in the background. I like to use different typefaces and sizes of type, which you can see, pretty clearly in this image. By rearranging the letters and presenting them in unfamiliar ways, I can call attention to letters as objects in themselves in ways that we don't usually, think of letters. I can also foreground words hidden within larger words, like here, I think I can use my cursor. So you have or and for and in and all kinds of different words in there. I'm also experimenting here with layers of transparency and printing on multiple layers of Duralar, which is this kind of plastic. So you get, words or letters that are behind the ones in front, like, and over here too. So you can highlight, different parts of the word in a different way. As arrangements of letters become more complex or abstracted from ways we normally encounter them, the letters transform into objects to be looked at as well as read. I think of these arrangements of letters as kind of still lifes, actually. I like places where you're reading a word, but also seeing it at the same time. There's a kind of unresolved buzzing back and forth between the word and the image, seeing and reading. They're not really one or the other, they're both. They're this and that, both text and image. Their identity is not static or fixed. I want the elements to have a kind of conversation as well, within individual pieces and then across multiple pieces, and a conversation that then occurs in the mind of the viewer as they encounter and engage with the piece. And this conversation I hope is carried through into, the other pieces in the show. I would also say, sort of broadly speaking, that language itself is the material of my work. My artworks explore the intersections between visual and verbal language systems and how these systems shape and frame our perceptions and understanding of the world around us. My work asks for an active viewer to actively process the disparate elements I set forth. And through this participation, hopefully meanings are in formation, the title of the show. So a slight digression here. So I don't know how many people are really familiar with Letterpress. So I thought I would include this slide. So here on the left is actually my little letterpress that I bought a few years ago to make these pieces, and it's quite a small one. The U of O has an amazing type lab with very large presses, and you can print much larger pieces. I can only print sort of an 8.5 by 11 sheet on this. And so So that's sort of an overview of the press. Here's some type in a type drawer, and you can see how they're organized by letter. This is a fairly large typeface. You can see, and then there are a couple down here of different sizes. Here's a sans serif, so it's very plain, and then a serif, so it has much more flourish going on. Some smaller, some bigger. So there's all different kinds of type. This here is what's called the chase, and it's the thing you create. You sort of create an architecture for the letters in the press. You sort of, with all these wooden blocks and metal bits here, you connect everything together and lay it out, or they actually call it composing. And so I'm composing type, and this particular one is actually the setup for this piece right here. You can see the MAT and stuff there. And actually here you can see the MAT. So that is actually what that piece is printed from. And so this chase then goes into this position in the press, and the ink is up here, and the rollers come up and go over the type, and then the paper comes up and hits it and prints it. So that's sort of a very quickie overview into what a letterpress kind of looks like. So moving on, this is an installation view of the first room. There's actually 2 rooms in this exhibition, and this is the sort of outside one. And this outer room has a sort of mix of older and newer work. These 2 paintings are, we just saw on the wall in the previous slide. And they kind of bring together many of the devices or visual vocabulary that are used to highlight the intersections between visual and verbal language. The first of which I'll talk about is contrasting painterly styles. So the 2 styles I tend to use, one is a very drippy, more abstract and tactile paint use, and the other one is a sort of more old master style that's realistic, and the objects are rendered highly realistic, and in this case the oranges and some of the letters. The old master style, I think, is quite transparent. We don't really see the paint, we see the object that's rendered first, and the drippy abstract style calls attention, paint as paint on canvas, and we see it really physically first. With the old master style, we look past the paint to sort of see the orange or the text. Just as when we read, we often look past or through the letters on the page to what the words say. The next device that I often use is this Modernist grid form. It's another form of visual vocabulary from art history that I borrow. The grid gives the text a visual framework. It makes the text a little bit harder to read. You tend to see the individual letters first before actually reading them. And in this case, the background texts are the titles. So the one on the left is comes and goes, it's repeated over and over. So I like that the grid allows for the text to actually do what it says. So it comes and goes from view as you're looking at it. Sometimes you can read it, sometimes you can't. And the one on the right is the background text is over and over. And it's just, a repeated sequence, just like the grid is a repeated sequence. Another device that I tend to use are these grade school sentence diagrams. I don't know if anyone ever did those. I think we have to be older. I was in like 8th grade and we actually did sentence diagramming. But these break the sentences into different parts of speech and put them into sort of a visual context or framework, which is the diagram itself. Different lines have different kinds of words. Diagonals tend to be like adjectives and things. And I find that kind of interesting. But the viewer has to stop and take time or care to decipher the content of the sentence. And I like that it slows the viewer down. So the one on the left, the subject, here it's up here, the diagram says subject to change or subject to change. And this word, subject or subject, is one of these interesting words that is both. It's both a noun and a verb, but it's spelled the same, but yet it has quite different meanings in different contexts. And on the right-hand side, it's quite an elaborate diagram, as you can see. And it's a sentence from a Gertrude Stein poem, I believe. And it says, each one being one, each one having been one, is remembering something of that thing. And so it's sort of about this repetition and remembering something of what has come before. I also like another device I use are words that break apart into other words. So you can see in the middle here is memento. So you have a me, a men, and a two. And then cleave, if you take the C away, it's leave. And over here, tether. If you take the T away, it's ether. So I think those are kind of fun. The other device in these paintings are, or in this painting, is the Vase face device. And that I really like this one because it is both a vase and a face at the same time, depending on how you look at it. Just like, you know, text can be a letter and a visual thing also. So I like this back and forth quality because it gets at the idea of identity of something, the identity of someone or something. And at any given moment, that identity is in flux and not necessarily fixed. Something can be both this and this, both face and face, or representation or paint at the same time. I like this sort of mutability and malleability of text. So these two paintings have a lot going on for me, but really they're about asking how many different ways can I articulate this sense of back and forth, the changeable malleability of nature, this back and forth. So this one kind of picks up again on this identity question. And the shifting nature of that identity. And I was thinking, well, if I paint this orange again, is it the same orange? How is it different? What happens in that moment between the painting, for me, the painter, and for you, the viewer? Does its identity as this orange change or shift from one painting to the other? Here I am this way, and over there I'm that way. I look similar, but am I? And I like this in-between thing. And actually these oranges are the same orange roughly as these too, if you see. There was an orange that repeated quite often in a number of my pieces at this point in time. And it's actually a Chardin orange from one of his still lifes, and you know, sort of a quotation, I guess, and a moment of admiration. And then this one, I thought, well, I've painted all these oranges. What if I just write the words? So it says an orange with leaves. So, you know, will that conjure in the reader's mind an orange with leaves? Do I actually have to paint it? But again, it has sort of some of the trademarks I was talking about before, contrasting painterly style. So the O and the R are painted in quite old master sort of realistic three-dimensional mode, whereas, and then there's a lot of drippy other stuff going on as well. I was thinking of the letters themselves as objects in a still life. And of course, there are words that break into other words. This one is actually from a larger series of paintings, and each word in each of the paintings had a word, the word that was in the paintings was about description. So this one is elucidate. Some of the other ones were articulate, clarify, decipher, render. I just wanted to see, you know, painting these kind of words, did that make anything more clear? In this one, I think it's interesting because in the grid, again, the grid, within the word elucidate is also the word elude. You can see here, somewhat highlighted. These paintings were different too because I sewed the words. You can see the sort of black thread lines in there. And then it's painted not with oil paint, but with a wax-based paint called encaustic paint. And it's a very tactile, very different from oil paint, actually, or how I use oil paint anyway. And I was, with the idea of sewing the words, I was trying to think about sort of embroidery and women's work, and sort of how does the domestic and women fit into this whole sort of tradition of painting and modernism and whatnot. These are all called Between. There are 9 letterpress pieces with photographs behind. And I was making those, these are quite recent, or more recent, made just in June, just as things were opening up a bit from the pandemic. All the phrases in them are what I call reverse phrases. Here's another version you can see better. So it's like conversations between and between conversations. So what happens to the meaning of the words, you know, these little phrases when they're reversed? And they all have the word between in them. I also think of the pictures as being anthropomorphized. I was really thinking of them as little figures and playing around with their interactions. The pictures all have pretty distinct shapes, and they're just kind of fun little figures to manipulate in photographs. And as we were opening up in June, I was sort of thinking about how, you know, how are people going to interact again? And so that was part of sort of what was going on in my head. I was also thinking about how the words are used. Are the words captions? Are they images that illustrate the words? Or is there a sort of parallel action going on between the words and the photographs? Do they create a dialogue or conversation between them? And what is that extends and supports what's going on in each realm, the realm of the word or the image? But mostly I really just like the idea of the pictures, and I thought they were really kind of fun. And the spaces in between them, and how close are the pictures, how far away are the pictures. It was just fun. And then this is another installation view. We're moving into the second room. And much of this work actually in this room was created during the pandemic. And it's kind of tied, they were all tied to my thoughts and feelings really about the time. So in a certain way, it's a sort of portrait of pandemic mode. It's kind of odd actually, that you'll see. So these first pieces were some of the first I made with the Duralar, and I was experimenting with the transparency and the layering of text. Previous to this, I really had only just printed straight letterpress on paper, and I hadn't really thought about how to sort of change it up a bit. So these were sort of my first attempts at thinking about how to extend letterpress into another realm. So this one is abounds, but it's also as bound. This one, the middle one, is grasping, but it's also gasping, or, you know, grasping for air. And then the third one on the right is the word facet repeated in that grid, and, you know, different layers are highlighted and come to the fore. So you read different words within the word facet, ace, fact, facet, etc. So that was interesting to me to sort of start this process of extending the letterpress into another realm. So then these were some of the first. I was like, well, if I can do transparency, let's think about doing some with images, and what would those images be? And so I started messing around with photography a bit. And since I've always used still life, the cups and such seemed like a logical progression. Yeah, so this was my first really attempt at thinking about how to use photography, and I really hadn't done it before. So I had to figure out, you know, sort of technical studio, how do you set up lights, Photoshop, that kind of stuff. So this is where I began. And again, thinking about the pandemic in a certain way too, with suspend. We were in this weird suspended broken time, and adrift, the same thing. And then winnow, being pulled apart and everything being not really great. So I thought that they sort of expressed those thoughts. These sort of are similar. These are a little different because if you go in person, you can see the letterpress is printed directly on these photographs, and it gives quite a different impression. You can't really tell from these slides, but letterpress, when it's printed on paper, gives quite an impression into the paper, and it has a very tactile quality, unlike on the Duralar, it really doesn't. It's very flat. But so in this case, you can actually really see the impression of the words on the paper, and that was kind of interesting to think about. I also like the words breach and cleave. They are words I've used often or throughout my career. I like that they both contain in their sort of definition a duality. So breach and cleave both have this sense of coming together and pulling apart at the same time. They also have other words buried within them. And then I was thinking about, well, how would I arrange these on the paper with the photograph, and sort of compositionally. So that's what I was thinking. And then again, I began really thinking about the still life objects as stand-ins for sort of our fractured moment. And then these were some continuation of these ideas, this fractured moment. And it was at about when the Black Lives Matter protests began 2 summers ago, as well as the pandemic. And I was really thinking, of the plates and cups as representations of this broken thing. And so the one on the left, I was thinking there's this reverse phrase again, through breaking, can we break through, kind of thing. And like, if we are going to take these broken pieces and start to try to put them back together, how would we do that? What does that look like? And it was really kind of a personal thinking through too, and working through and articulating these feelings, how we can repair with the broken bits that are left behind. What does this look like? So, reforming, reconfiguring, they certainly aren't put back together in any functional way exactly, but, it's like, we're never going to go back to where we were. So how can we make something work with the bits that are left? Are there new ways to reform and repair and conceptualize that? These are 4 more that were sort of about that. And I was thinking, the image is a broken cup that I then put back together with Sculpey, which is a kind of kids clay material that doesn't ever harden. So you can, it's not permanent by any means, but I thought this was another kind of cool way to think about mending the broken pieces. So each photograph is the same mended cup from 4 different points of view. And then the text is amending from 4 different points of view. And then these are titled Monument. And they, were sort of occurred, or I made them in response to all the protests and the tearing down of monuments that happened all over the country, and sort of thinking about, well, with my vocabulary of broken cups and such, could I think about, what would a new monument look like, or something to that effect? How do we think about monuments in a different way? And then this is an older one. It goes back in time a bit. I'm thinking about the word inherit, and what do we inherit? Objects handed down from generation to generation, traditions handed down, history of painting, and then thinking about myself as a woman painter, and how do I insert myself in the sort of art making tradition? Again, it has the word inherit is split up into, little words, so inherit, and then over here, it in her or her in it. And I kind of like that sort of mashup. It also has, the old master realist style that I like to work in, the transparency of those rendered objects, and then rearrange the objects and how the objects are sort of rearranged parallel to the way that the words within words of inherit are rearranged. I also am interested in the sort of precarious stacking of the language and of the still life itself. It could fall over at any moment kind of thing. I'm also, another sort of vein of my work is the sense that this is a really pretty painting or a beautiful painting. And I like the idea of meeting a viewer on a number of different levels. Like one can look at these pieces and just look at them as a beautiful still life. But then also one can engage further and read the words and think about the words and what they might mean and ask questions about why I did what I did, or why is the image upside down and things like that. So I feel like my work can be engaged on a number of different levels, not just these, but the other ones as well. If you have a kind of pretty picture, you might get someone to look twice, kind of thing. These are 4 more. This is an installation from the installation view from the show. These are for letterpress with text again, and they kind of engage this idea or continue the idea of stacking that I was in that previous painting. So this one up here reads, the text on it is artifice, and then the one next to it is edifice. And then this one down here is contingent, and this one is instability, stability in. And 3 of these 3 are printed on directly on the photograph. And again, I've gotten a little better at the sort of mechanical process of printing. And so the paper is much thicker and quite a really nice photo paper. So the impression left by the text is actually is pretty nice, actually. Let's see here. Here's a close-up version of 2 of them. I think you can sort of see it on the instability, stability in. You can see the texture of the paper in contrast. But again, I'm asking, and then on the right, contingent, I like the idea that the word content is also contained within contingent. I like that juxtaposition of content contingent. And again, thinking more about this precarious stack or balance of objects and how fragile that balance is, how that fragile balance relates to our culture and time and language itself. So in addition to making these prints, I've also been painting. I've been making a series of paintings, of course, in which the text on the paintings are all these connector words, words that join thoughts or phrases together. And I feel that these phrases sort of exemplify the moment of pandemic in a certain way, like we know where we came from, and we know where we might know that we might come out of it. And these words are kind of stuck in the middle. And we're kind of stuck in the middle. But some examples, obviously, whereas, moreover, this is to say, and yet, above all, by contrast, those kinds of words, but they kind of join different clauses of sentences and thoughts. Again, I like the realism of the lemons set against the painterly abstraction of the ground, with the text as a kind of mediator or go-between. I'm also, with these, experimenting a bit with the paint itself and its physicality, moving it around differently on the page, or on the canvas, actually. At this time, I guess it was right as the pandemic was starting, like March of 2020, was it? There was a Gerhard Richter show that was supposed to open in New York. It was this gigantic, retrospective or whatever of his work. And of course it couldn't open, but what they did do, of course, was have Zoom calls and Zoom films of him making his paintings. And they had this one with this that showed him dragging a giant squeegee across some of his paintings to make them. So I thought, well, I could use a squeegee too. So these are actually made with a squeegee. So I thought that was kind of fun, but I'd never done that before. And it was kind of a different way of working. So again, being in Eugene during the pandemic, I did a lot of walking, as I'm sure a lot of people did. And during these walks, I used to think a lot about relationships between landscape and culture and ask, how do we view nature and landscape now? Does the natural world even exist apart from culture and our shaping of it? Is it always seen through this lens of culture? So in response, I began making another body of work that's trying to think about places where the natural and the cultural come together, or thinking about the relationships, some relationships between them. So these are two of the first I made using stencils of natural forms and foliage and shades of green to suggest the landscape. The text on the left, yes, is artifact, and the text on the right is memento. As you see, I use that word over and over again. And they're overlaid onto this sort of fabricated or imagined landscape space. You know, I was interested in how the words overlaid onto this landscape space, the meaning of the words, how did that affect the beautiful painting, actually. And then these two are, again, letterpress versions, thinking about some of the similar ideas. So on the left, using these reverse phrases again, background, ground back, underbrush, brush under, and the photographs are sort of out of focus views of landscapes. So I was thinking about, you know, again, looking through the lens of language. And here again, I use these connector words. These are part of that series I was talking about before. Transitional phrases that join clauses of sentences or ideas. The still life objects and snippets of foliage are sort of suspended in a nowhere in between space. And again, the words are acting as connectors between nature and culture in a certain way. I was also thinking about our inaction on climate change. I don't know, I'm trying to sort of integrate those kinds of thoughts as well. But again, I hadn't really put the still life objects in the landscape before. And so this was sort of an attempt to think about how to do that. And again, the contrasting painterly styles, the cups are pretty highly rendered, whereas the rest is somewhat drippy and tactile in a different way. And then these are actually the newest pieces in the show, and are really a continuation of these thoughts about how we see landscape. I'm thinking about how we look through frames, how we look through windows and lenses when we look at landscape. Often looking through our window, not really experiencing it in person or reading about it in a book or something like that. And I'm sort of asking, which lens are we looking through and how is that affecting our vision in a certain sense? So I came back to the idea of embroidery and sort of domesticity. This one here, this little piece here is actually a piece of curtain from my studio. So the photo is looking out through the curtain, through the window, and the curtain is like toile. So it's a representation of nature as well. So you have this kind of through a number of different windows, as well as the embroidery sort of bit of curtain fabric. So it's a part, it's, you know, that word does a bunch of different things. This one, border, order. The image is actually a reflection in a puddle, looking at a sidewalk. And I don't know, I like the image and I thought it went with this. And the embroidery's on window screen in this case, which is an amazing embroidery medium because it's such a lovely grid. Makes it pretty easy. And then the last one here is, you know, a similar thing, the curtain fabric. It's close, it's close, and it's loose. All three of those things. So that's pretty much what I have for now. And I hope that you all will have some questions.
Thank you so much, Libby. Every time we have the opportunity to hear you talk about these works, or I mean, my experience going in and looking again in the gallery at these different pairs of works, I learned something new, or am able to think about different pairings in a new way. And I appreciated you pointing out, the dual effect of the vase and the faces in your painting. And then when you brought up the Between series, I was looking kind of with new eyes at the negative space between the vessels you paired in those works. And you started to touch on, what we mentioned quite a good deal about what teacups have represented in the work and what inspired that. And you mentioned a little bit about sort of looking at, in addition to the lens of language, like the lens of gender. And as a woman and a painter, I know you've talked about cups being a representation of domesticity as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that fits into your choice of cups as an image, especially in the recent work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think of it as all of those things. The cups are, I tend to anthropomorphize them, which is interesting. But yes, domesticity for sure. I mean, the sort of high tea or not high tea. I'm also, a mother and a wife and all those things. And so those are all sort of lenses that I look through. Still life for me has always been, a big part of my work, and partially because it's readily at hand. I mean, you can go to the grocery store and buy apples and pears and things or whatever, and you can be in control of the setup. I can, create a still life pretty quickly, so you don't have to pay a model or any of those things. And I really like that about still life. And of course, it has a long tradition in and of itself. And again, thinking about how to insert myself in that tradition.
And I see an audience question that came in. It might be a quick answer or might be a long answer.
Okay.
What are your earliest sources of obsession with text as an object?
Ooh, interesting. My earliest obsession. Oh gosh, let's see. Well, I have to say Jasper Johns has always been an early, I've always been a fan of his, I guess I should say. And I love his encaustic works. I mean, one in particular, or a couple in particular, the figures, the 0 through 9, and how, those are, I mean, it's not exactly text, they're numbers, but they are figures. And I just love the way that he can create images repeating, again, a series. They always look different. They're always in different medium, but yet they're always, incredibly tactile, incredibly object-like. There's one I'm thinking of that is the word "the," which is really one of my favorites. It's just sort of a gray ground with the word, "the" in encaustic, and the comes out of the ground, but yet is also part of the ground. And again, this duality between figure and ground, and object and not object. So yeah, I'd have to say those are some of my first and most obsessions.
And even earlier than your art education or particular artists, is there a moment, there's a follow-up question too about text and text as object, about if that goes back even earlier in some way.
Oh, earlier in my life? I don't know. I'm not sure. One isn't coming to mind right off the bat, sorry.
I appreciate you mentioned too, in your talk, being inspired by how Gerhard Richter worked, and you mentioned Jasper Johns just now. Are there other artists, certainly from when you were studying painting, or artists whose work you're following now, that you feel is especially connected to the way that you're working with text and image, or other aspects of your work?
Sure. Yeah, there's many that I follow. When I was talking about the double orange painting, the two that are almost exactly the same, I was looking a lot at the artist Ronnie Horn, and she often does doubles, and she puts and hers can be photographs of the same person, from moment to moment. and there's like a whole series of them. So there's like moments in between the photograph. And so things do change. But she's also made a series of sculptures where they are sort of doubles, and one is in one room and she puts another one in a different room. So you have this sort of back and forth encounter with the object. So that was also part of what I was thinking. I refer to her work a lot, and actually in the newer landscape work, she's obsessed with sort of Iceland and has spent a lot of time there. And that landscape and the way she talks about the landscape is very interesting to me. Another painter, actually, that the JSMA had one in the, it's not called Masterworks on Loan anymore, but Shared Visions. I'm having a moment, but her work is amazing. She's a contemporary British painter whose name I will come up with in just a moment, but the way that she, pardon?
Jenny Saville.
Yes, thank you, Jenny Saville. And her use of paint is just incredible. She can have this, she often does portraits actually of people, and they are moments of intense realism mixed with moments of incredible abstraction, and just her use of paint is fabulous. So if you get a chance, definitely check out her work.
Oh, and so many good questions are continuing to come in. So let me go through a couple more, and I might jump around a bit just while we're on the topic. How do you think about the difference between painting from life and painting from art history? Or do you think is there a difference between your approach to those as inspirations?
Interesting question. It's definitely different. I think that one informs the other, certainly. You know, I had to obviously buy an orange to paint, but yet I was thinking about that Chardin orange and different Chardin oranges. So there's sort of a confluence of art historical and you know, from life, I think. So I think it's really back and forth.
Scroll through our question box here to make sure I'm not missing things. And lots of thanks to you too from attendees for sharing about your work. Someone writes, it's wonderful to see your work. Does the rhythm of the word, as in poetic meter, influence how you paint the background? In other words, do sounds factor in synesthetically to your work?
Ooh, interesting. Not so much in these. I think in other bodies of work, I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I spent a lot of time with Gertrude Stein in sort of my earlier life, and thinking about her work, and her work is very different when you read it and when you say it. And I think, you know, that was an influence for a while. I mean, in one of these paintings, as I said, there is a quotation from her, but it's not so much about sound, I don't think, in that case. But that's interesting. I will think about that. Thank you.
Should we do maybe two more? I have two more questions. I can read, let's see. Another question about your use of sentence diagrams as graphic elements. Did you sit in the high school classroom and muse on the graphic shape of the diagram? And in grade school, when you looked at the alphabet above the teacher's head, did those strike you as more graphic than symbolic? I love the visual imagery we're given in this question to place ourselves in that moment, because we've all been there. It's a very, you know, common memory we have to access.
So you all did sometimes diagramming too, I guess. I'm not sure that I really thought about it so much back then in 8th grade, for sure. But when I stumbled on them again in graduate school, I was like, oh, eureka, this is just incredible. And, you know, I often manipulated the diagram to sort of conform with perspective lines. So I kind of altered it to create spaces in paintings. But yeah, no, it's an amazing form to make text become much more visual, and it was very helpful to me in my sort of process of developing these ideas.
And the Q&A box on Zoom webinar is such a quirky feature too. So there was a great comment here that I'm not sure if I accidentally moved to a different category. I'm going to dig it up and read it. The sender might have moved it out of the question, but I'm going to read it anyway because I like it. The Your work has such a wonderful tension between playfulness and precision, and the works are whimsical, but deeply and thoroughly considered. So when you set out to make this work, do happy accidents play a role? Are the words and components or connections already thought out, or do they emerge as you're making the work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends. I mean, I tend to be a planner and a list maker and, all those things. So I often go in with a pretty particular thing that I'm trying to do, but it often doesn't come out the way I initially think. I mean, especially with a painting, you can always, you have this idea of how you want it to look, but it often doesn't look that way when you're done. So, but yeah, precision and not are definitely a duality that plays a role in all this making. And with the letterpress, I mean, you have to be quite precise because you have to lay it all out ahead of time, and it prints the way it prints. But on the other hand, if you print it and you don't like it, you can also go in and manipulate it and change the spacing and um, change the composition quite a bit in response. So often what you think you want, then you print it and it's not that thing anymore. So it does change also. That sort of malleability is a play too.
I'm curious too, because we talked so much about words together. If you consider yourself a writer or a poet, or if you would use, any title or category other than artist to describe what you're doing, or if you feel that identity rests solely within visual artist.
I don't know. That's a tough question. I think it depends on what I'm working on. Sometimes, I mean, in the past, I've created pieces that have text that go together in a certain way that I think are more poetic, or text and an image that go together that are more poetic than others. I'm not sure that. I mean, I think that the paintings, the series of paintings with the connector words, I think of those as being a little bit poetic because they're kind of joining images and text in a more fluid way or something, or a less or more abstract way, perhaps. So that seems more poetic to me. But yeah, it's something to think about for sure.
You've given all of us so much to think about and so much to appreciate in your work. And I know we're coming up on our hour. Is there anything else that you hoped we would ask or bring up, or any kind of closing thoughts you want to share? I know we hope people who are in town and can safely do so will come and visit the show if they haven't already.
Yes,
It makes all the difference to get to see your works in person, especially as you've arranged them in the gallery, thinking about the space they exist in and the pairings of work, and framed versus unframed, and all these careful groupings of works. And so that's a part of the experience I really hope that appreciators of your work will get to have if they can come visit GSMA in the next several weeks.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can just, reiterate that point because they really are different in person, or some of them. I mean, there's subtle differences that you do not pick up on the slide. So if you do have a chance, I would love it if you could come look at them in real life. So
yeah, consider that invitation extended. So thank you everyone for attending Libby's talk today. Thank you so much, Libby, for sharing all of this with us. This was excellent. And we hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend, and maybe we'll get to see you in the JSMA soon.